to the Connect the Dots podcast. Jeffrey Klein has conversations with a diverse array of successful people, sharing their stories to educate, inspire, and entertain. Here is your host, Jeffrey.
This episode is going to blow you away. I use the pun as I speak with the amazing glassblower, Elliot Worker, who you can just tell is an awesome guy. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure you will too. Thanks so much. My guest today is Elliot Worker, a British award-winning sculptor and glassblower. He was the winner on the second season of the Netflix series Blown Away. Elliot has been working as an artist since 2009 and works mostly with molten glass. He worked for Peter Layton as part of his London glassblowing studio team for 8 years before creating his own space to work in Hertfordshire. Elliot has won the Frederick Stewart Memorial Fund by the Worshipful Company of Glass Sellers, and his work is part of the Broadfield House Museum collection. He also won the Craft and Design Award at the British Glass Biennale. Elliot graduated from Bang University in Wales with a degree in psychology, and then studied glassmaking in the historic Glass Quarter in Stourbridge. Welcome, Elliot.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I like to start always at the beginning. So, where were you born and what did your parents do for a living?
Well, right at the beginning. So, I was born in Wolverhampton, which is in the Midlands in the UK, just by Birmingham, which is technically our second city.
I might have to argue with that.
Oh yeah, Manchester, is it? Yeah.
We'll discuss that. Sorry, I didn't interrupt.
Well, that's why I said supposedly. You know, it's always changing that really. But you know, a big industrial sort of centre, that area, very ex-steel, ex-glass, sort of industrial materials. My mother has worked for the NHS, the National Health Service, for going on 28 years, something like that. And my dad is a cobbler, which is a shoe repair person, and also has like a hardware store and does engraving, and he does all sorts of other things as well, like making fishing flies and stuff like that. So he's quite a hands-on guy.
And so when you were a kid, we talk about, when I grow up I want to be either a sports star, maybe you want to be a footballer or an astronaut. Did you have something that you thought, when I grow up I want to be this?
It sounds sort of likely or unlikely depending on your perspective, but I always wanted to be an artist. I think if someone had asked me what I wanted to do, it would have been that, but I've always been quite like a pragmatic person. So I actually didn't try, I didn't try to be an artist. I sort of fell into it. And I was sort of focused more on the academic side and sciences and stuff when I was in school, because that's sort of what I was good at. But art was always in the background of my life. And if I could have picked something to be, it would have been an artist. So I'm quite pleased at how things turned out, really.
And so when you were growing up, was there a role model, other artists? I mean, you said your mother works for the National Health Service, your dad's, tinkering with shoes and hardware, not necessarily artistic. Was there anyone else in whether you knew or looked up to?
I think it always changed, really, because I mean, my girlfriend says that I've sort of lived a couple of different lives in my time. So it's all my sort of role models have always changed depending on where I'm sort of focusing at the time. So I mean, when I was in school, we had like a great teacher in my sort of infant school. We were in a Church of England school, so there were like religious ceremonies and assemblies and stuff like that, and he would like get us out of it every now and again and sit and sort of play his guitar to us in the field and stuff. So I quite liked his sort of rebellious attitude towards the establishment quite a lot when I was a kid. And then moving into like when I was studying psychology, the psychiatrist R.D. Laing, who was sort of preeminent in understanding like psychosis and behavioral disorders, wrote a couple of really interesting books about like people with very sort of strange and specific psychoses that you don't really get anymore because everyone's, you're medicated quite quickly, but at this time you weren't medicated, so these things would come to the surface. And he was a big inspiration for me when I was studying psychology. And one of the reasons I stopped studying that really was because that the time that he was working, that time had passed. And so things were very, very different when I was studying. So I realized I would never get into the sort of realm that he was working in. And then obviously moving into the sort of art world after that degree, there's a sculptor using glass called Ivan Mez, who's one of the great sort of Czech cast glass artists. And I remember reading an article about him, and he was, at the time, he was making like 1 or 2 pieces a year and like selling these pieces for like 30 grand or something, and then spending the rest of the year doing what he wanted and then make another 2 pieces. And I just thought that was an amazing sort of way of living. I mean, I'm sure it was a lot different for him than it sounds, but that was sort of quite a big inspiration for me as well when I started working with glass and following that.
Come back to that in 1 second, but part of my obsession is about, being able to tell amazing stories. So when you were growing up, was there anyone who you thought was, wow, they really are good at telling stories? Was there anyone who fit that mold?
Well, my dad and his mom, my nan, were like brilliant at storytelling. I mean, mostly through song and stuff. It's like my dad's one of these guys where you can't really talk to him without him taking something you've said and making a little song up about it. And that was something that my nan did as well. And sort of weave, when you weave this sort of musicality and stuff and like comedy into like a general conversation, it can be really annoying, obviously, as you imagine it would be. But I think that sort of rubbed off quite a lot on me. And I tend to do that quite a lot now, and remember how annoyed I was about it when I was a kid, and enjoying the other side of it, I think.
Well, it reminds me of 2 things. One, so I have twin daughters who are almost 16, who literally from the moment they wake up to when they go to sleep, they're singing.
Yeah.
And so music is always going on. They're in school now, so it's a little quieter than usual.
Right.
And but also the show that I've introduced my kids to, which is Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Oh, that's
which is the improv show. And
yeah.
I watched the British version. And so to me, that the idea that when they have that skill of having to sing a song on a very specific odd topic in some genre, and they do it lightning on their feet, I always found that super impressive as a skill to be able to just come up with lyrics on the spot and just, so I love that creativity. So let's talk about your art and glassblowing. So you said you were always interested in art. You weren't glassblowing as a youth, were you?
No. My first sort of introduction to it was in school, glass in general. So when I was doing my A levels, I signed up to this evening class for people in the local village who were doing stained glass. So they had a tutor who came into the school. It was like an adult education thing, but I was like at a loose end. So I actually started working with glass just out of school, really. So in my last sort of year of A levels before I went to university. And so that was sort of my first introduction to it. Before that, I'd never really seen it. I mean, coming from the Black Country, which is where, Stourbridge is in the Black Country, Wordsley, where they were making all the cut crystal. The industry was falling off a cliff even when I was at school, really. The factories were closing down. It was sort of moving to, production in China and Poland and places like that. So I never really saw it. I was never taken anywhere to see it. So my first introduction to glass was in a cold form, and it was just completely by chance that I came across it. I was always like painting and making things with wood and stuff like that. But as far as glass was concerned, it's such a niche thing anyway. Your chances of just coming across it are quite, rare. So I was quite lucky, I think.
And prior to that, so what was your first paying job? I always find that an interesting question to hear what people did.
Well, I'm quite proud of the fact that I've only ever had one job outside of the arts. So, when I was a kid, I never really had like a paper round or anything like that. I was sort of, studying or whatever. It was never like a thing I was sort of made to do, which I think you do have to make kids get a job in a lot of ways, really. Because it's quite counterintuitive, I think. But like when I was at university, I was actually making money through making this stained glass work. So I was doing that for the 3 years I was at university doing like a few commissions and doing craft shows, but my only actual job outside the arts was as like a pot washer for a few months at a noodle bar in the local town, you know. So I'm quite pleased at that sort of you know, that lack of structured earning, really.
Well, I think again, you know, I promote all the time that, you know, you, if there's a quote, you know, if you work doing something you love,
Mm.
then you never really work. You know,
Yeah, yeah. That
um,
used to feel right, but the last few months it's changed a bit.
well, we'll get yeah. I mean, I'm sure now that you're more in demand than ever. So you know, glass blowing is not something, you know, that many of us have exposure to, and one of the things that from watching the show is those furnaces, which look like, you know, a recipe for, you know, disaster in terms
That's
of,
the
you
right.
know, yeah, like, you know, burning yourself. Do you think that glass blowing within the arts is one of the more dangerous, you know, fields?
I think so. I mean, when you're thinking of materials, you know, you have, you know, a lot of very safe material. I mean, everything has its hazards. You know, sculpting wood, sculpting stone. You know, you have the dust, and the environment of a sculptor is never the same as it is for someone like painting, say, or illustrating. The environment's always a little bit more sort of edgy, and when it comes to like the more extreme versions, glass and metal, you know, if you've ever seen inside a bronze foundry, you know, pouring streams of molten metal into pits in the ground, you know, it's all a bit nuts, really. And I think, you know, glass is definitely on that spectrum, maybe at the higher end of the spectrum.
I thought, well, maybe paper mache sculpting is something I could do. That's pretty
Yeah,
safe.
yeah. You might glue your hands together, but no, you're
Is that part of the appeal? The kind of not risk, but the kind of edge to it.
I think for a lot of people it is. For me personally, that's the bit I could really do without. You know, the process itself really suits me as a person because of its like immediacy and its reliance on like your physicality. So I'm, you know, I've always been interested in that, the physical side of it, the fact that your body is reacting to the material. I mean, it's never resting. If it's resting, it's a puddle, and so you're not moving. As soon as you're moving with it, the whole thing is flowing, and it's very sort of sympathetic to how you are as a person, how you move and interact with the material. So I've always enjoyed that. But the environment and the heat and the risk involved in sort of investment. So when you start a piece, you have to finish it all the way through to the end, and if you make any mistakes during that time, that's a mistake, and you have to either scrap it or deal with it. I don't like that side of it personally. I think if there was a nicer way of doing it, then I'd be the
Not
first
having a
person to do
burning
that.
furnace there that you could possibly, you know, have some severe, you know, medical,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
mean, and when
emergency.
you know, when you own a furnace, you know, so I've been running this furnace now for just over a year. It was actually delivered a few days after I flew to do the filming, and since then it's not really been off. And so you're also committed to this thing. You know, it calls me up when it has a problem in the middle of the night, 2 a.m. in the morning. It'll call me up and say I'm having a problem, and I have to go in there and sort of sort it out and figure out how to do it. So there's a lot of weird things that go along with owning and running a furnace as well, you know, that you don't expect. I didn't expect that, really. It's like having a marriage with this bit of equipment.
That's reason enough to. I mean, but could you not go to some? So you have your own place. The difference between having your own place versus working out of someone else's. You know, did you want to have your own? You know, was that kind of?
I think a lot of it's to do with control. So the sort of work that I make and the way that I make, I need a lot of control over the equipment. I need to be able to change things as and when I see fit. You know, I need temperatures to change. I need consistency of glass to change. Um, the only way of having that really strict control, which I need, is by having my own place. I mean, I spent like quite a few years hiring to make work, and
Mhm.
there's only really like one place in the country in the UK that you can go and have that control. And the downside of that is you pay for it like massively. So you're looking at like 700 to £1,000 per day to hire with the sort of level of control that you really need. So it quickly becomes, you know, untenable. But there are a lot of downsides to having your own place, but I've loved it really, because you can do what you like when you like, and you can sort of sort everything out exactly how you need it. So
Well, and as someone who's never had a proper job, not to discourage,
yeah,
to discourage that,
yeah,
I'm an entrepreneur, and so one of I think the draws to that kind of lifestyle is that you call it control. I would say another word for that is freedom. That you have the freedom to decide. You talked about one of your inspirations. He did 2 pieces a year, and then he had the rest of the year to kind of craft the life. I want to talk about the show for just a second. I'm sure you've talked ad nauseum once it came out. But I'm kind of fascinated by, I worked in the film industry, and my children really like reality shows. And I try and explain to them it's not real.
Right.
So,
it's not real.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, how realistic do you think Blown Away was in terms of the things that happened and the way it was produced?
Well, this is where I sort of can give massive kudos to the people who put it together, the production company, because as far as the actual process part, the making part of the show, it's all there in front of you, really. I mean, my one sort of not concern about it, but the strange thing was for me was to see a 6-hour making session, which was start to finish 6 hours, no exceptions, reduced to this tiny little flicker on the screen. That was really odd for me. But it was all filmed as we were doing it. They like the bits where things break and where there's like the drama in there. But because of the nature of the process, things did break and there was drama. Normally, it's never a calm process, but in that environment, when you have this sudden time pressure and you're doing things that you've never done before a lot of the time, the drama's real, and the strain and the stress is real. So I'd say, as far as that goes, it's pretty good. Yeah, pretty accurate.
And in terms of it being a competition, because that's the other thing, is that artists generally are not in that kind of environment where you're actually competing against someone else who's doing the same, realm of work that you're doing. Did you feel that hampered your creativity or enhanced your creativity?
Well, to be honest, like the competition, it relies on the other people to have that in their head as well. It relies on everyone to have a certain competitive mindset. And as far as like the other contestants on the show, we all got on so well, and we were all so supportive of each other, that the competitive element was there, but you were mostly, you were still rooting for the other person. I mean, right. Something which like I was recalled when I actually watched the show was, Kat Burns walking around like asking someone how they are, like, oh, how are you getting on? Oh, how are you getting on? Oh, that looks good, and she was like that, and everyone was sort of, supporting each other and making the whole process like quite pleasant, really.
Although one thing I do recall from the show as well is there are times where there's certain tools that didn't seem to be available to, I was like, don't they have that for everybody? And they're like, no, they had to share.
Yeah,
and I think that added some tension.
That was horrible. That was the thing. We all knew that would be a part of it from the start. While there were so many people, you couldn't get hold of certain things. You're always having to weave in and out of other makers. But I think there was nothing like, no one was blamed for that. If anyone was blamed, we were blaming the production company for not getting enough equipment for us. But
well, I'm wondering if that was...
That was a tool. That was a tool of theirs to sort of add to the tension. Yeah, that was
right.
I
think it was intentional to not have enough tools so that they would create some drama that might not have existed.
Yeah, they want to create difficulty for us and make us sort of work at that higher level. But that was part of the challenge of the whole thing, part of the enjoyment as well. When you're limited in certain ways, you have to think of different avenues and different ways around the limitations.
Well, it reminds me of a distinction that a UPM from the film industry shared with me. He was giving, when I was kind of first starting out, and he was talking to a group of us, and he said the distinction between an artist and a craftsman. He said an artist just does whatever they want without any limitations, no constrictions. He said, but a craftsman is someone who has parameters in what they're doing. And so he uses the example of Michelangelo in terms of the Sistine Chapel. Well, he only had so much space that he could work with, and someone was paying him. So I like the idea that when you're creating something with some, and all of these, reality shows, I think, put on these, whether it's MasterChef or, they're putting time, which is always the one, like, yeah, I can create this beautiful thing, but you're telling me to do this in 6 hours, a process that might take me 3 days. And so there's that intention. But I like the idea that, art is crafted because, you're, and I think it forces you in a good way sometimes to create something that, by that challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's the strange thing about glass as a material. I mean, there are a lot of people working with it as purely as craftspeople, people who are interested in the process, who are interested in, the function or the design of the work that they're making. But there are a lot of people now coming through who are working with the material in a completely different way, and the thing about glass itself is it's so process reliant, it's like you can't really do anything with it unless you understand the technicalities of the craft itself. So it's very much on that line between the two things, and I don't think you can really have one without the other. You can't have the art in a work of glass particularly without having some element of the craft in there and how it's actually manipulated, because it is so process driven.
So I've been to Venice a couple times, and I'm a big fan of the and I've been to Murano in particular, where I guess it's the glass, at least from an outsider, the glass blowing kind of mecca of the world. I guess part of my is curious about whether you think it's justified in being Venetian art being what it is. Why is it that way? And is there opportunity for Hertfordshire to become the next Venice of England?
I think the sort of, not the obsession with Venetian glass, but the focus on it, it's still very much there for a lot of the artists who are working with the material now. I mean, everyone references Venetian technique. You can't help but reference it in your work, and some people do it deliberately, some people do it by association, but you can't really get away from it. And I think the reason for a lot of this reference of Venetian technique, especially in the artwork that's been produced now, is because there's like a renaissance going on, not against it, but to try and understand the material's place in the wider scheme of things, and to understand the contemporary practice in relation to the history of the material. I think a lot of, I mean, I haven't been, to be honest, but I can see it being like the ultimate glass sort of tourist trap in a way. It's like, this is glass, this is how it's made, this is what we make with it, you know what I mean? And I'm sure it's sort of laid out like that, but because it's been like, it was such a huge commercial enterprise for the Italians for so long, they owned it worldwide, global exports, and so it's very protected there. And because of that, and because of the sort of commerce involved in it, it becomes very commercialized. And so a lot of the people who are making in Italy might think they're making this, this historic work, but in a lot of ways, they're just sort of following the vein that's been commercially successful for, hundreds, if not like thousands of years, like thinking back, to the work that was being made for, the aristocracy in Europe. And that work still being made and still being sort of touted as this like amazing sort of contemporary stuff, because it doesn't really lose that edge, I think, in a lot of ways. But I'm not sure, I'm sure it's deserved, and I know it's deserved, and we're going to keep referencing it. But I think there's a change in attitude, and, the new Venetian style has actually been developed in the States, really, in places like Seattle and Corning. They've taken the bones of Venetian aesthetic and sort of turned it into this completely new thing, really.
Well, for me, I went, as I said, I was there twice. And the first time you get off the boat and they shuffle you into some, what I call touristy trap, where they have a demonstration and all that. The second time I went, we had family friends who actually have a electrical shop where they get some of their fittings from a glassblower in Venice. And so we had kind of an insight. We went to his shop, which was further in the island, and we went right when it was closing time. Nobody was there, and we got
Right.
like a hands-on, not a master class because he wasn't teaching, but
Yeah.
we got firsthand. He's like, "Let me make you something," and then
Yeah.
my kids were there. What do you want? And so we have these. It was a different experience, I think, that we had than the average. And
Yeah, and I've heard of these. The studios have the frontage,
yeah,
and then I've heard quite a bit about these like back rooms where like only the collectors can go, and then if they know you're anything to do with glass, if they know you make glass or you understand,
they don't let you in.
they won't let you in. It's
Yeah.
like you're either buying or you're not looking.
It was interesting because the glass blower was also a little sensitive to us seeing what he was doing.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms
Well,
of
it's so competitive there. It's like
and he designed stuff incredibly. But for me, as a traveler, to have that kind of experience was phenomenal. And you just to see, a round piece of black, cylinder that's transformed into this beautiful horse is what he ended up making us.
Yeah.
In front of my eyes was pretty phenomenal. So here's an interesting one. Do you think that art imitates life, or life imitates art?
Well, I think I can only really answer one way because of my current focus on still life. It's got to be art imitating life, really. I mean, that's the thing that I spend most of my time doing, and the artwork that I'm looking at the minute is all sort of representational. I can't see how it works the other way unless it's like in music or like theater or something, really.
Well, I think it's the way I think that you might make the argument is in the derivatives of art. So that if you take something that is art, and then you then transform it to something new in life.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of what I was thinking with music. You make a piece of music that influences a culture. I guess it's always give and take, really. But like I just think of the punk scene and how that changed the whole of the UK.
And then it just made me think of the idea of something being artistic and something being good. And the old expression, art is not in the eye of the beholder. Do you think that there is any kind of objectivity in what makes good glass blowing?
At the minute, I would say not really, because of the line that it's walking between, there's people working with glass who are making like conceptual art, and just using the material or the properties or the concept behind the material to feed into something bigger. If you're looking at it solely from, is that a good piece of glass point of view, I don't even think that glass has the structure around it, say, that ceramics does. So if you're you look at, I mean, I collect ceramics, and I've been to a lot of shows where people are buying ceramics. They always flip it over and they feel the bottom, and they want the thickness of the piece to be all the same. And it's like glass doesn't have that sort of restriction on it. You can have a massively solid, thick bit of glass with a tiny bubble in, which is an accomplished piece, or something which is so wafer thin you can bend it, which is also an accomplished piece. So I quite like that about glass, that it doesn't have a lot of restrictions to it, even from a purely craft based perspective. The most like sincere piece of glass which has been blown by a beginner can be like a beautiful object and an accomplished piece of work. They might not be able to replicate it, but does that even matter?
Well, it reminds me of, there's a famous art by someone named Klein, Klein Blue, and it's a giant canvas of blue, and a lot of people go, "What? How is that?"
Yeah.
And I think it was, he was the first guy who did that. So, I couldn't do that now. Just, hey, here's a piece of red, Klein red.
Yeah.
But, what's the biggest challenge with working with glass?
The biggest challenge is I always think of it as like the resting state of the material. So aside from having to, make work and be successful as an artist, like the material itself has, the first thing about it is it doesn't have a conducive resting state. So if I hand you like a piece of clay or a piece of thin metal and I say, make a dog or make a face, you can sit there with it, you can squeeze it, you can squash it, you can make something out of it. If I give you a massive molten glass and say, make something with this, it just doesn't work. So the biggest challenge is actually understanding how to even get the material into the space that you can actually start manipulating it. And without that, you have nothing really with it.
Now you have become a very well-known glass maker very quickly because of the Netflix show, and so therefore, and success is something that lots of people define. How do you define success?
Well, like I said before, I've always been quite pragmatic about this whole shift in career, and I knew how long it would take to even make anything of it at all. So before the show, I had my like 10-year plan, relying on the fact that I would keep working and moving forward slowly, step by step by step. And it was all going fine. I like had my plan together. I just opened the studio. The only thing that wasn't really planned was doing the show. So I'm sort of, my whole perception of it has now shifted, and my idea of success has changed like massively because of that sudden, this sudden change in the way I work and the way I'm perceived globally. I think because the UK is such a small scene, I was sort of making my way into it in quite a sort of focused, positive way, and now suddenly I have like a global audience that I need to sort of deal with and satisfy. So I don't really know what happens next.
Goods and bads.
Yeah, I don't know what happens next. I don't know how. I think it'll just have to happen naturally, and deal with it as it comes along. But I mean, the success for an artist, I think, in the end, in the most basic level, really, if you want to pursue it properly, you have to be able to make a living doing it, and you don't need to be like selling work for millions of pounds or Damien Hirst or whatever, or Jeff Koons. You don't need to do that. You can, the idea of a struggling artist is sort of true, but there are so many people who are making like a good living and contributing to society being artists anyway. So I think that's success enough for anyone, really.
You remind me in terms of the difference when you have a plan, and there's two things I've been referencing a lot recently. One is Mike Tyson famously said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah.
And maybe a more, artful way of saying it is, John Lennon, in a song that I love, said, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans.
Yeah.
And so you had your plan, and then, something unexpected happens.
In a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah, in a good way.
And I think, again, it's, we look at this last year of craziness with the pandemic. It's
exactly,
life is going to throw stuff at you, and it's about how you respond and react to it that make the difference. And
I think that has changed my whole experience a bit as well. I mean, when we were filming, it was just before everything happened. It was when I heard a little bit on the news, but we were so sort of contained where we were. We were all in the same hotel. We were going from hotel to studio to hotel. There wasn't really much else going on. And then I come back to the UK through an empty airport, and then 2 days later, Canada closes their border, and I try and go shopping here, and there's nothing in the supermarkets, and I just didn't know what had happened. And then since then, it's been the pandemic, so I've been working through that, just waiting for the show to come out, and then it has, right in the middle of the whole affair. So it's been quite strange.
We need to watch good shows. So
yeah. I think it came out just when everyone was starting to express how sick of Netflix they were as well. So I was a bit like, oh God.
Well, we loved the show. It was just, and again, something, we happen to like glass art, and we have a bunch that we've had over the years, and it's just, I think there is something about that material, its
Mm.
fluidity, and the fact that it's not kind of concrete, and just the idea that it changes form, and then it's like almost like frozen in time when it's cools.
Yeah, well,
um,
yeah. I mean, it's very
um,
filmable as well, very filmable.
what inspires you? So you're an artist, so what inspires you to create a particular piece?
Um, I think in a lot of ways, because I didn't have any like formal training. I'm sort of realizing this as I'm sort of talking to more people. It's like I'm sort of exploring art history while I'm making. So I started off, like 5 or 6 years ago, making anatomical classical sculpture in the material, and then I've moved from that into the still life genre. So I'm sort of working not through history, but I'm working through different genres of art and seeing how I can bring something new to it or relate it to the practice that I'm running, really. So I don't know, a lot of things inspire me, and it changes all of the time. I don't have a particular, you know, idea or thing that I'm looking at all the time and focusing on, like research or anything like that. I do research in all sorts of different areas, and everything's developing all the time. So yeah, it's quite an interesting process, really.
If you could go back to when you were 21 and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Ah, I have no idea. I can't even remember what I was doing then. I think I probably would have just been starting my psychology degree.
Well, if you
And
went
so
back now, would you do the degree again?
oh yeah, without a doubt. That's the thing. It's like I wouldn't change. I wouldn't change anything that I've done. I think without doing that degree, I learned a lot on it as well. It was like it's a fascinating subject. It just didn't fulfill everything that I wanted it to
Mm.
fulfill. And without having that sort of disappointment in my life, I wouldn't have made this drastic shift. And I decided I was going to shift in the second year after we had this lecture from a professor who'd spent 10 years videoing rats reaching for food and then burning bits of their brain to see how their fingers change. And I just like remember listening to this guy and thinking, no, I can't be involved in any of this stuff. So I think without that, I wouldn't have made the shift, really. So I wouldn't change anything that I've done, really.
My wife is British and went to, she has a psychology degree from Leeds.
Right.
So, and she hasn't, her, she worked in the film industry, and she's worked in parent education. She actually worked for the NHS. And yeah, I think again, it's not a matter of, because if you look at, your life and you take any one element, piece away, it'll have that ripple effect and could have affected, so people ask me, oh, which I went to law school and I've never been a lawyer. But I think that it's hard to pinpoint, well, partly being in law school that I recognize I don't want to be in this career,
Exactly. And you need that. I think people have to make that choice way too early, really.
Yeah, I keep telling, one of the things I like about England and Europe is the gap year that a lot of people do before they go to university. And I'm trying to encourage my kids to do that. But they're like, oh, I don't be behind. I'm like, you won't be behind. You actually be ahead. But
Yeah, in a lot of ways. Yeah, I'm sure.
So one of the things that I find interesting is that, so glass blowing has been around a very long time. And, you talk about different techniques that you learn. What do you think is the next trend, though, in the glass blowing world?
I mean, I'm sort of relatively new to it, I think, really. I've been working professionally for about 9 years. And I've come into it from, a perspective of everything's in decline, especially in the UK. It's like the industry has sort of finished up the industry that was that was so prevalent in my area as well in the Midlands. That sort of finished, so that was in decline. Then the training and all the funding for the training that came along with that is now pretty much gone, and studios are closing all over the place. Educational facilities are closing and shutting up. There's only about 5 places in the UK you can go and learn it now. So I don't know. I've always got like a sort of semi-pessimistic view of it because of that. But on the flip side, the people who are actually working and making beautiful work, making artistic work, there's a demand there for what we're making, and even in the sort of semi-industrial sort of like lighting and design work and stuff like that, it's all sort of coming up. So I don't know, it's quite weird for me to see, industry declining, artistic sort of practice declining, but everything still seeming quite vibrant. So I don't know, it's a little bit difficult. I think I'll get a better perspective of it when I go to the States and see the museum there and sort of talk to the people who are involved in it in the States, because that's really where the future of the material is. And there's so much training going on, and there's so many institutions that support the material and people who work in it. So I'll get a better idea over there, I think.
Do you know when that will be, or it's all
we've just sort of decided this year's a bit of a write-off, so we're going to do it next spring, which I'm really excited about, because I never did the gap year. I went from education to education to education, and then into work, and then into having a studio. So I never got to do the whole. I mean, you can travel miles with glass. You can travel all over the world with glass, because it's such like a tight scene. And you can call people up and go and work for them and stay with them or whatever. So I missed all of that. So I'm looking forward to sort of expanding that horizon a little bit.
And that was kind of my next question was,
right.
For you, what's next in terms of your glass blowing journey?
I mean, my focus has always been on, I think I'm quite self-serving as an artist. I came into it wanting to make work that fulfills me, and it's always a journey towards the ideal series or the ideal set of sculptures that I want to make. And it's a continuing thing, and it's always changing. So I'm chasing something all the time, and having my own place and working with Bethany and expanding into like the gallery scene a little bit. That's all going to be part of the journey, and hopefully I'll get more freedom to focus on what I want to make, and develop into different materials and work with other people, collaborating with different materials and stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I always like doing a show as well. It's like, that's my favorite thing. If I've got like a year to work towards a show, then I'm on it,
I'll have to find a way to have a show in Philadelphia. That'll be something well.
Yeah, that'll be good. Yeah. So I'm trying to sort of plan something when I come to Corning to do my residency. I want to have a show in New York at the same time. So I'm working with a gallery in the UK that I just did a solo show with, and they've got a space in New York that they can work with. So I'm hoping to sort of build it into that and really have like a good showcase when I come over.
Well, I look forward to hopefully being able to go, because that would be awesome.
Hopefully by next year it'll all free up a bit,
We're now what I call my rapid fire questions, and these are meant to be kind of just off the cuff. Doesn't always go that way, but let's see how we go. So if they made a movie about your life, who would you want to play you?
Elijah Wood, I think, because I like his eyes. He looks really sad, and I think that would work well for me.
Should stories always have happy endings?
No, they should have sad endings or no ending at all. I think that's my favorite ending, where nothing is concluded, and there's no sequel either. I don't like a sequel.
Kind of the Waiting for Godot. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I love the stage direction. They said, "Should we go?" Yeah, let's go. They don't move.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite emoji?
At the minute, it's the squirting aubergine, because I'm making a piece based on that.
Is there a glass blowing emoji that exists?
I don't think so, but I saw a few GIFs the other day, which are quite good.
Like sort of blowtorch or something.
Yeah.
Name one of your favorite songs.
Favorite songs are I like Song 2 by Blur, because it's quite concise. Yeah. Very Britpop. Yeah.
Nothing wrong with Britpop. What is your favorite social media platform?
The only one I use, Instagram.
And can you name a book that left a lasting impression on you?
It would probably be Lewis Carroll, Through the Looking Glass, the Alice ones. I've got really into the illustrations, and loads of different artists have done illustrations for that book, and I've got about maybe 17 copies, and I've been trying to sort of collect all the different illustrations.
There's a piece that was done through the New York Public Library where they had Instagram stories that combine the literature, and Alice in Wonderland is one of them. It's really interesting how they've done it, where you're reading the story and then things are coming to life. And
yeah. I mean, that was one of the first books that I read, and the illustration is so like iconic. And there's an exhibition on at the minute. I think it's it starts later this month at the British Library, of all the different sort of illustrators and graphic designers that have done stuff based on that story. So yeah, it's very rich, and there's a lot going on there.
What's one thing you can't live without?
Good food, I think. And I've been doing a lot more cooking over lockdown. It's been good fun.
A lot of aubergine at the moment?
Yeah, a fair bit, yeah.
And I should let people know, I lived in England, but an aubergine is an eggplant for us stateside people.
That's the one, yeah.
If you could be credited for inventing something, what would it be and why?
So it hasn't been invented yet, but I'm quite a keen forager, and I think if I could invent a way of like propagating some of these more wild varieties of mushroom, you'd be onto a winner there, like the ceps and stuff like that, or the chicken of the woods. People can't really propagate it, and I'd love to sort of figure out a way of doing that, so you could like get them sort of in the shops commercially, like properly, some of the weirder varieties.
So you've been very kind with your time, and I really appreciate it, Elliot. Is there anything at the moment that you're promoting, or you want people to direct them, that's top of mind?
Well, I think something quite fun at the minute is we're Blowfish Glass UK. So that's the online gallery that my partner and sidekick and girlfriend has set up, Bethany. She's doing a competition at the minute for kids, and we've had a lot of emails recently about like people wanting to know about work and very serious stuff. And since we've launched this competition, there've been like emails of like kids drawings and stuff, which we're really enjoying. So she's doing a design your own Mr. Noteworthy character, which was the cartoon character I made on the show.
Yep.
And so, yeah, we're trying to get a load of different designs from kids, and we're going to make a few of them. And whoever wins like certain categories of the design competition, they get a free one as well. So that's always good fun. Something a little less serious, a bit more lighthearted.
I like that. And I'm assuming the easiest way for people to connect with you and look at your work is Instagram. And then what is it? Do you have a website where you have your stuff?
Yeah, my website's under construction at the minute, but yeah, Instagram, Worker Glass Art, and then Blowfish Glass UK. That's the gallery that I'm selling from. There's a load of other galleries that I'm working with. Messam's Gallery in London, London Glassblowing, and Vessel Gallery, which is also in London. Very London centric at the minute. But yeah, you can find my stuff all over the place.
Well, this has been a super treat for me. We were big fans of you on the show and of your work. And as I'm scrolling through your Instagram, I was about to say blown away.
Blown away, yeah. Why not?
Netflix had that, that little pun that that works.
Yeah, they did well with that one, yeah.
But I really appreciate your time and coming with us and helping us. Really, thank you for helping us connect the dots.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.